This is the Extra Mile.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to The Extra Mile. I'm Justin Duncan. I'm always here with my friend and co-host, the G5. Hey, George, how are you?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. Real good. I need some coffee. Caleb needs some coffee.
Let's pour the coffee.
Let's do it.
How's everybody's week been?
Good. It's good.
Caleb, how's your week been?
Great. Sleepless.
We'll do a voiceover.
Oh, man.
Oh, that's great.
He said it was horrible.
Sleepless. Those are the worst, sleepless nights. Well, I hope things get better for you. I guess any way I can help, let me know.
Is it just that dog?
Yeah, it's just the dog.
It's just
She's
the
been
dog.
great.
Does she just bark and bark and bark?
No, she whines when she needs to go potty. And the first night, it was like twice. The second
gotcha.
night, thank you. It was 3 times. The third night, it was like almost the whole night. But last night, we ran her around in the backyard for like an hour before bed. She only woke up once.
Really?
It was beautiful.
Oh, man. Oh, that's nice. It's like having a kid almost.
Yes.
Yeah.
Except I don't know what that's like, so I guess I can't compare.
Yeah, it's not. But sorry to get your hopes up.
I can't put her in a cage.
Yeah, you can't just leave them outside. Yeah.
I mean, those baby cages. They call them cribs.
Oh, man.
If it's built of oak, then it's not a crime.
All right, so there's a lot of things I want to talk about, but we have some time. So let's talk about music. I wanted to tap into your music. How about you just give us a little taste of what your voice sounds like musically? No, you are a doctor in music.
Close. I'm ABD.
Okay.
Conservative. So I have I'm all but dissertation. I passed my orals.
Cool.
And my dissertation defense. I actually was really heavily considering going back to school this fall. It's once you're at my level, I literally just do like 1 credit hour with my advisor until I finish my paper. But he actually, my mentor Bill, he just published his book over Brecht, who's this German playwright who lived in America during World War II.
Oh, wow.
And
Brecht?
yeah, Brecht. And he is a Brecht scholar, and so he ended up finishing his textbook probably the last 2 or 3 years, and he's actually gotten it published. And so Texas Tech is going to celebrate that by allowing him to do the 3-penny opera in the fall. And that's for those who are musical aficionados, that's the first musical, or considered to be the first musical.
Really?
And so he's going to get to do it. And he's been telling me for like a decade, hey, if I ever do the 3-penny opera, I want you to be McKeith. And I was like, okay.
Wow.
So he's like, hey, I'm going to do it. You got to be a student, though. And I said, well, I guess I'll go back and finish my doctorate.
Okay. So
then I will be Dr. Duncan, but not like medical doctor. I'll be PhD
no, you'll be
doctor.
you'll be knowledgeable doctor.
Yeah, I'll be knowledgeable on the one thing I wrote my doctorate on.
On music.
Arts administration.
Oh, my goodness.
But yeah, I mean, I do have a master's in choral conducting, and I have a bachelor's where I studied voice. Mm-hmm. And it was a great path to study that. My undergrad is a liberal arts degree, so I was able to do a major in music as well as a minor in history, and then all of the breadth requirements that a liberal arts degree has. And in that, you're studying not only history and theory, music theory, which is actually looking at the notes. Like you actually say, hey, this note stacked on top of this other note, it makes a chord, it has this harmonic tone. It will then have this harmonic progression as those notes move to other notes. So that's music theory. A lot of people wash out on that because it's kind of a learning curve when you're trying to learn the language of music.
Really?
And
so it is like a language. You have to learn it.
Music is absolutely a language. And we know that instinctively just worshiping. Like if you have, let's say, grown up in the church, you've spent any length of time doing hymnity, where your ear will naturally pick up the way that chords move, the way that harmonies move. Like if you've sung alto for your whole life, which I know some of our listeners have, You get a sense of the internal harmonies when it means to sing those middle harmonies that flesh out the chord, which are critical. Because if it's just like a soloist up there, you're not singing together. And if everybody's singing a single line, it gets a little weird. Not weird, but it's just a different way of singing it. Whereas if we're all singing in different parts, that seems to fit into the American ear whenever we're singing hymns to God and worshiping together. So it's kind of interesting whenever we have our traditional hymnody. And
what's like different? Like,
well, I mean, if you take world music,
yeah, exactly.
which I'm not too much of an expert on, not too learned on it, but I know that there are different harmonic progressions. There's different keys. So, like, let's say if you take Russian Orthodoxy, like, they will have our keys, but they'll also have different modes that they sing in. Like, they'll do church modes from, like, the 800s, where, let's say if you're a pianist, if you start on the C key and you went up an octave, that's actually a church mode, but we call that a major key, which is where most of our songs lie. But they would call that Ionian mode. So if you went up to D, it's Dorian. And if you like Lord of the Rings, you like The Hobbit.
Yeah.
You know the song, the Durin song, where he's like, "Far under the misty mountains go." That's Dorian. It's Dorian mode. And so you play that by playing D, and you go up the scale. And so next time you're at a piano, if you start on the D key and you just go up an octave, those natural progressions, half steps and whole steps,
really,
the Dorian mode, and it goes through. There's 7 different modes, and so there's some church hymns that are based on those. And then if you go outside of like the West and you go into the East, they really have half pitches, it's not even half steps, it's like quarter steps, and that's where you'll get into like the Indian and the Chinese sounds, where their instruments don't really mesh with the Western instruments just because they're in different keys. They can't play the same number of pitches that Western instruments do. And so that's where you get, for us, it would sound exotic, but for them, it would be their natural instruments.
Sure.
And so, yeah, it's amazing what gift we've been given to express sound with instruments, but then also with our voices, which everybody has our voice, right? We have the voice of our heart. And so I would put my 2 cents into that camp, where like we are all given a voice to worship God. And it's more than just the pitches that we sing together. It's that we are of one mind and of one heart whenever we're singing and worshiping God with music.
Yeah. There's this idea of unity, and it's really beautiful when hundreds of people come together and are singing songs. Especially, I mean, if you go to any concert, it's that way, but let alone when you're in a worship setting and we're all in that mode of, I am praising God. We're all thinking about what God has done for us, and now we're praising Him and giving thanks to Him. I mean, that's what a lot of the Psalms are about. I mean, do you like the Psalms, for example?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, like if you take the Psalms and you put it into the context of the Psalms, like what were they? I mean, they're poems, but they're also words. And so I'm not aware that we have any type of musical notation from the Psalm books from David's time, but we have their words. And that would mean that the music, what it sounded like, the pitches, that's all held within the oral memory of
A tradition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we have a bit of that too. Like if you were to sing a hymn of old from your childhood, and you're reading it in the psalm book, and the pitches are a little different, or the words kind of change, oh, that seems odd. I've noticed that in some of our books that we use whenever we're leading. Oh, I don't remember that song saying that. And so when we have our oral memory as a people, a collective people, and then you were to, like, let's say you move from your congregation and you move up to Indiana.
Yeah, sure.
Or you move to Ohio, or you move to a different geographical region, they might have a different oral memory of what songs
Interesting.
sound like.
Interesting. A different sound.
Yeah, even though like we're all Americans or whatever. And so like let's say you go to Kentucky, it's like, well, we don't sing your songs. I mean, I noticed that from my church growing up in East Texas and then moving to Lubbock to this congregation. I will still lead songs when I get up and do song leading, and I'll be like choosing my songs, and I'll say, oh, well, I need something for the Lord's Supper. I'm like, well, everybody knows this one. We'll just do that one. It's short, you know, and then I can do a longer song for the one after the Lord's Supper. And so I'll be rationalizing that. And then, I don't know, that one after the Lord's Supper, it's long and it might be a little hard. So whatever. And so we'll just do the easy one that everybody knows. And then I'll get up there and sing it. Nobody will sing the first verse. And it's just me leading a solo. And then I'll have the realization, and I'll start talking to people afterward. And I'll say, y'all don't know that one, do you? And you're like, no, I've never heard sung that. I'm like, that's okay. I've been singing that since I was 7.
Oh, man.
In my own home congregation. So it's interesting how, though, like we're in Texas, you know, really close, within 300 miles of where I grew up, that the oral tradition of this congregation is different from the one that I grew up in. But many of the songs are the same, you know, like if we sing Jesus Loves Me, everybody sings Jesus Loves Me.
Sure.
So there are those that just sort of in the collective memory of the American Church of Christ, which it would be really interesting to speak to someone who, like Coach Gomez, to ask him, hey, what songs did y'all sing? Or
yeah, when he was like in Africa and places like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Did they, you know, I mean, and ask the hard questions like, did they sing together? Was there a soloist? Did they do call and response? That was really prevalent in the church at the turn of the 20th century, is they would do what's called call and response, where you would have, basically due to lack of books, like you would have the songbook.
Really? Interesting.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you think about it, how precious would it be to have a book, you know, let alone a Bible?
True. Sometimes they only had a Bible.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
you would have the Bible. That's why everybody memorized it. And then you had the songbook. And so the singer, the song leader, would sing the first line, and then they would, the audience would respond, a call and response. And it was literally just practical, right? Because, well, okay, everybody read the first hymn. Nobody can see it, right? So you would sing it. They would hear it, and then they would immediately respond.
I guess that makes sense. Somewhere in class, maybe it was a Bible class or something, long time ago, someone was telling me that there was a small town, like one Bible congregation, and you know, this was before they had all the printing stuff today, and literally different members would memorize different sections of the text so they could know whole books and whole, you know.
And it's practical.
Yeah.
Like that's a practical use of memory, which we don't, our generation, those living on the earth today, we don't really have that need, which is sad in a way. But then it's also the fact that everybody has access to
literally a Bible app right there.
Like I can't read. How can I read the Bible? Well, just press play and somebody will read it to you. Mm-hmm. You know,
Justin will read it to you, and then he'll sing to you afterwards.
Access my recordings and send me $1. No, I mean. I think accessibility of today's age is so different than what it has been in times past.
You think it enables us?
It's pros and cons both ways, right? To not have it in our collective memory means that people don't memorize it and people might not study it as much. Where if it's just readily at your fingertips, it's like, well, I mean, Psalms 137. Okay, I don't know it, but I'll just look it up because there it is. You know, until your phone dies, it's like, well, I can't access it.
I mean, yeah, I Googled it just a second ago. Some stuff.
It's one of those things where study is very important, and I think that's what we're called to do as Christians. It's like we're supposed to study the Word. I mean, be instant, in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke.
I mean, there were times where the Bible was sometimes the only book available to
that
people,
is true.
too.
It was actually the first book.
Yeah, on the printing press. Yeah, the Gutenberg,
And it was the first book published on the internet. I don't know. I just made that up.
I don't know either, but it's a pretty influential book. to say the least.
Yeah, so with music, I mean, if you were to go outside of the culture and we start judging other cultures for how they perform music, I think that that's not necessarily the way to go, as much as you're looking at other cultures and saying, wow, this is how they worship. You know, can you imagine Paul traveling from Jerusalem, which is where the temple was, which is where the Levitical priesthood was there worshiping God as their job. They did the sacrifices, and we're told in David and Solomon's time that there were 144 Levitical priests that were in the temple that made up a choir.
Yeah.
And it was their job to sing. Mm-hmm. Now, 144 voice choir, that's a lot of people singing. That's essentially our congregation singing, right? But their job would be to sing, and that's every day. And their songbook would be the book of the Psalms, or the Psalms that were written at the time. Right. And so what they had access to. But then there was Asaph, and there were other people who their job was to write music. And if you go back in Western history, we talk about our composers that we learn about in school: Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, Schumann, Schubert, all of them. Those type of people. Their job was to write music. So you can imagine that you not only have the institution of music worship that was set up for the temple by people who that was their job, but then they were also the Levitical priests to do it. They were to provide music for the worship service, for the sacrifices, for the temple worship, for the cleansing, for the washings, for the anointings, for all of those things. And literally their job was to do that. How wonderful that could have been. If you could go back in time and listen, the way I envision that when I read 1st and 2nd Samuel and then the Kings, whenever they're talking about in the Chronicles, where you're talking about that time period in the temple where worship was the most amazing thing that was ever created by God.
Right.
He had established his temple. It was built. He had the thing that he had established centuries prior, a millennia prior, with the children of Israel moving into that land, and now here it is established. I can't imagine that. Well, I can just say that what we are able to achieve here, or what Christians are able to do when they worship God,
when they're filled
in one accord, when their hearts are aligned, and God is present, and it's really all firing on all cylinders. I'm sure it sounded something like that.
Yeah. That type of passion.
Yeah.
I think I was in a class one time where you were teaching, and you were talking about the sound of like some of the Psalms or the Jewish tradition at the time, and it's not like what we would think as a 3-part harmony with notes and things like that. You were talking about how it was just literally a lot of improv and grabbing something, shouting, banging on it, like really being moved. And I'm trying to think of how that would sound, but is that right?
We're not told how they sang.
Yeah.
We have no notation of what they sang. Like our earliest musical notation comes from like the 800s or the 700s. And
wasn't Mozart in the 1700s?
1700s.
Yeah.
So we're talking 1,000 years before Mozart.
Yeah.
So, and how they did this is they were, forgive me for like geographical regions and time, but it was really kind of in the 50s and 60s, 1950s and 60s, that there was this resurgence. They were taking these books, these leather-bound books from the medieval ages, and they were falling apart, and the leather binding, and we're talking like vellum, like this is animal skin.
Really? Wow, yeah.
And they were in, it's those libraries that they've got the books chained to the bookshelves.
Dinosaur leather type stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so they've got these things, and they're sort of falling apart, and they're like, okay, well, we're going to do a reconstruction on these books, and we're going to preserve them for the next generation, et cetera. And so they would cut the binding, and they were going to recreate it. Well, they found that in the hard leather binding as backing, we would use cardboard today.
Right.
But what they found is when they cut open this leather, out popped sort of like these these typo, like, whenever you don't have an eraser, the eraser is one of the most amazing inventions in humankind. If you think
really
about
is.
it,
It really
like
is.
the backspace button.
What's frustrating about the backspace button, though, is that I had to use my pinky, and I had to stress myself every time I make a mistake, which is very, well, poetic.
It is. I mean, that's beautiful. I want to come back to that because that was well said. Yeah, and so like when you're typewriting before the backspace button, if you made a mistake on the last part on the paper, you had to redo it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the amount of efficiency that we have with a word processor, but then like with an eraser, let's say you were illuminating a page, right? And you've been working and working and working, and you've done 17 different types of inks, and you've drawn, and you made this thing, and then you make a mistake. Well, they kind of would take a knife and they would scrape through the vellum, like let's just scrape off the top layer and get rid of the ink, and then they would keep going. But then eventually you'd have holes in it, and so the vellum would be ruined and you have to start over. And so that was their whiteout, as they would like scrape away the material. But when they cut open the bindings, they found these typoed and actually just sort of like, well, we don't sing these songs anymore. And they would take these pieces of paper, these vellum sheets, and they would multiple layer stack them, and then they would wrap the leather binding, and they would bind new books with them. So the pages of the books are here, and then the leather binding, they open the leather binding, and here's these old pieces of paper that they were discarding.
Probably preserved better.
And it preserved
Wow.
musical notation from centuries past. And
Wow.
so you have this amazing resurgence of, look at this musical notation that we never really seen before. Like, look at all these songs that have been notated that we get to
Grab the lyre. Let's go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you have this resurgence of like classic music and saying, okay, I'm a medieval scholar. And so we go through and they do numeric notation and stuff, but that's from the 800s. That's centuries after the time of Christ. And that is a millennia after the time of David and the time of Solomon. That was 800 years. So we're talking a long stretch of time that humans have been worshiping God with music. And like what you say, Mozart was eons ago, centuries ago.
Mm-hmm.
But he was 1,700 years after the time of Christ.
Wow.
And we're 2,000 years.
Yeah.
I was going to say. But yeah, so we're talking stretches of time where we have our base of what we use in Western notation and the music that we perform. Like if you go listen to the symphony, you're listening to music that's either brand new or it's just a couple hundred years old. How do you know what something sounded 2,800 years ago?
Yeah, how do you know?
How do you know?
You just don't know.
And so we can kind of recreate it, if you have notation and you can say, oh, they have the words, but then there's like little dashes up and below the words, and so you can kind of piece together, oh, this was early notation where like they went up. Really? But you're still seeing notation that's based on the oral memory. It's like, let's say we could take Jesus Love Me, which we all know, and when Jesus love me, this I know. So like if you just took the words and wrote them on a sheet of paper, but then you wanted to say, well, what if we forgot Jesus Loves Me? What if Jesus Loves Me is just one of the 6,000 songs that we sing every year?
Mm-hmm.
How would we kind of remember Jesus loved me this? And you could even put like dashes through the words, and it's like, oh, it goes up here. Oh, remember it goes down. Oh, that's right. Yeah. That's right. And you're sitting there practicing it, say, and you're like, wait, we got that wrong. Oh, remember it goes down here. Oh, and you could do like a note. So that was like the earliest notation, is you'd have the text written on the piece of paper, and then you would have like little dashes going through it to say, oh yeah, it goes down here. I forgot.
Right. So you just bring in like Psalm 100 is a really short psalm. Which is says like, shout out praises to the Lord, all the earth, worship the Lord with joy, and enter his presence with joyful singing, right? Acknowledge that the Lord is God. He made us and we belong to him. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving, his courts with, there's that idea of praise. I imagine the courts with that choir you were talking about. Give him thanks, praise his name, for the Lord is good and his loyal love endures forever, and he is faithful for all generations. See, I just point that one out because there's the idea of shouting. And so, I don't know. I don't know what that would sound like.
Yeah, precisely. And so that's really the kind of the question is, what did it sound like? And we don't know. Excuse me. So from that point, it's basically a sermonization. So you say, what is the evidence that we're given? We're given evidence that not only was there a 144 voice Levitical choir.
Right, yeah.
You had to be a Levite to be in that choir. There was also a 144 person orchestra.
And these things had to be pleasing to the ear because you have, for example, David playing the harp,
Yep.
and it's putting to ease Saul and his turmoil.
Absolutely. Well, and the young men and their music, that's in Psalms 137, where, you know, the quieting of the young men and their music. Like if the young men can't play music.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get that level of awe and wonderment when you say, what could this be? So let's knock down all of our walls of what we think music sounds like, and let's say, what was music? If you go back through the time periods of the Jewish people, when did they sing? There's multiple occasions of when the Israelites were in a location, and it would say, the Bible tells us, they all said with one voice.
Mm-hmm.
That phrase happens repeatedly. And if you could Google that, they all said with one voice. How can you say with one voice, you know, be gone with him, crucify him? Mm-hmm. Like, how do you say with one voice? Is it that, I mean, so the word cacophony, that's one of my favorite words. Cacophony is like when you're standing in the middle of 16 lanes of traffic, and it's the sound. That sound that you get where it's just noise, and it's deafening. Kind of like right before worship starts, that sound in the room.
Everyone just talking.
Everybody's talking over each other. And
just a chit chat.
Yeah, and so that's cacophony. Is it that? Like, is that what music sounded like? Was it everybody doing a single offering? We were told that they were to do it in decency and in order, so that there was an order with New Testament worship. But like with Old Testament worship, was it everybody saying something at one time, but God interprets that from their heart?
Yeah, well, it was also very in the moment as well. For example, you brought out The Hobbit and what was it? The
Durin song.
The Durin song.
I think that's what it is.
No, it is. Yeah, Durin's Bane.
Yeah.
And and oftentimes those songs, for example, in that book, is centered around some sort of tale or story. And you hear after, for example, in Exodus, after the Red Sea parts in two, they break out in song and worship. After Deborah's song, Mary's song, and also the judge.
It was Miriam, right? Miriam?
No, it was Miriam. But who's the judge? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but it's those moments.
Mm-hmm. The female judge. Come on now.
I'm stalling for you.
Delilah,
So you can
Deborah. Is it Caleb? Help me out. Yeah, celebrating the victory song. Deborah. Okay, yeah. I was right. I was like, I know it starts with a D. Again, she breaks out into song after their victory. I mean, it just seems like it's centered around these moments where they break out in song and praise. And then they write beautiful pieces of literature to go along with these words, literature that stands the test of time and inspires us even throughout different languages to inspire us to worship God and to draw close. Take some of their psalms and their words and create our own hymns with them and sing our own praises with them today. That says a lot that they're able to do that. Not just that it must have sounded good and beautiful and pleasing, but there was a sense of care and artistic work and creativity that sometimes we forget about as Christians.
Yeah, and in my own sermonization, like what I envision that sounding like, whenever I read those stories, where they in one accord or they in one voice said these words. And it's not just like, be gone with him, crucify him, which it's easy to get a chant going with so few words. And I'm like, Texas rights or whatever. Like you just say three words and...
get off the podcast.
Well, but then you can get like Corey is the one who always says that you can get three words going, like coffee cups. You get three syllables, and you can get a chant going, right, with a group of people. I don't know what it is, but
Praise the Lord.
exactly. So if
Yeah.
you said praise the Lord, you could get a chant going with praise the Lord. It feels good. It's 3 syllables. And so
I mean,
how
that is
do
the
you-
Trinity. No, just kidding.
well, but how do you get a chant going with a page worth of song? So what I envision that sounding like is that you have a song leader, you have a person inventing the words, there's some form of call and response, and the music, the pitches would have been in their vernacular ear, like what they have memorized as their tunes, right? So we do that as well. We have songs that we just sort of have,
Just in the back of our mind.
and then you can put new words on them. We even have those in our own songbook where you say, oh, this isn't that same song, but it's the same pitches. It would be very similar to that, I'm assuming. But then it also, for the Israelites worshiping, they had instruments and they were using them. We're told when they brought the Ark of the Covenant up, and David not only was playing tambourines and cymbals, and there was a great joy and great cry. I can only imagine that was like a parade.
All right.
What a parade would sound
I
like.
bet it was. But
then he also danced to the Lord.
here's another question. Yeah, he did. Like, how did we get to the point where, the idea of me projecting my voice sounds good. Like, that was horrible. But how did we get to the point, or how did we discover, or why did we think that us prolonging a certain sound, just like opening our mouth and that, I think that's going to sound good. Like, that just sounds like a crazy thing to me.
Well, we didn't invent it.
No.
God gave it to us.
Well, yeah, obviously.
Well,
But
but
we
that's
had
not
to.
obvious. I mean,
Well,
that is where I fall in my opinion of it, is that God gave us singing.
You think the instinct to sing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Now,
Okay,
it's
that's
also
valid.
like,
I
if
don't
you
know if I
go,
agree with
I
it.
mean, if you want to go back into like secular music study, it was required to project.
Mm-hmm.
So like when Moses brought the entire nation of Israel around him, and he was giving them instruction from God. God says, say unto all the people these things. And he's like, all right, listen up, everybody. How is he speaking to 1.2 million people, or however many there were? How do you do that? How do we even speak without microphones in our little itty-bitty building with 300 people?
Yeah, project.
And so it's a matter of just physical requirement. Like, you would need to get over the acoustics of being heard. So like, if you, let's say, instead of going 2,800 years ago, let's go to like 800 years ago, to the 1200s.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's go to like Notre Dame de Paris, the big Notre Dame Cathedral
Gotcha.
in Paris. Okay, so now we're in there.
Tragedy, by the way.
I know it is a tragedy because
It really hurts when I see
the music
pictures
of
it.
Perotin and Léonin. Really, it was the first recorded use of multiple part singing that we have in Western music.
Really.
So like, you have the main, what they call the cantus firmus, or the main hymn. So that's the top line. And then they were adding multiple layers of harmony below that. So Léonin, which was 900. See, this is what happens with retention. When you don't talk about these things for a decade, you're like, I think it's 900. It's either 900 or 1000, AD. Léonin, who was a monk at Notre Dame de Paris, he took the cantus firmus, the songs that they sang every day in worship,
Yeah.
and he added a second harmony to it. And then his student, Perotin, he added a third and a fourth.
He's like, I could do better.
I kind of feel like that was
Yeah.
it. Yeah, it's like,
It's
really?
like-
You did 2? I'll do 4. And so we have Perotin's music, and there's actually a YouTube. I don't remember the group doing it, but they take Perotin's music and they sing it in Notre Dame in the space that it was composed. And they sing Peroten's music. And you get a sense of, oh, that's why he wrote it that way. Because of the acoustic of the structure that he was standing in, which was destroyed by fire a few years ago.
As you admire history and architecture, as I do, and just like, it's so sad. It's so sad.
Truly.
The person that how that fire started, it's a lot of guilt.
It was probably a welder.
Yeah. Well, you have to live with that for the rest of your life.
To destroy.
Yeah. I destroyed the Notre Dame.
It's fine. They'll rebuild it, and they'll probably put glass in it or something. But the point is that we at least were able to record a performance.
That's amazing.
So that's different than most human history. Is for instance, I was very fortunate enough to be in Germany on a trip, and we ended up at this really small church building that was built in the I don't remember now, but let's say it was built in the 1300s, okay? And the Nazis, during World War II, put munitions in the churches, which is what they did. So they took God out of it, and they put the bullets in there and the shells.
Makes sense.
And so the Allies, when they were doing their daytime and their nighttime bombings, they bombed the churches because that's where the munitions were. And what happens when you blow up munitions? There's a catastrophic explosion.
Yeah, for real.
And so, basically, all of it wasn't just that was a church building, and that's sad because that was the building where the brethren met, I suppose. But that particular building was where Heinrich Schütz, who was a German composer, who did the very earliest parts of what we call hymnody. And so it's homophonic singing like we do, where we're all singing the same word at the same time with the same rhythm or variations of the rhythm. And so the very first or earliest, so you had like Martin Luther who did Germanic hymnody, and then you had Heinrich Schütz, who was another composer that just sort of continued in that vein. And then that's a common thread that goes to our American hymnody. What's very much, if you open a Heinrich Schütz hymn, it looks very similar to what we sing in our book.
Interesting.
And so that church building was destroyed in World War II. And so we don't know, we can't recreate with a choir being able to read the notation that we have with the words that we have. I mean, it looks like our hymns, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can't go to that building and recreate what it sounded like for future generations because of war, which is sad. There is as a rabbit hole, there's an amazing event that's happening at that building currently. I'm not going to remember where it is. I'll have to look it up, and I'll send it to Caleb. That way we can put it up on the screen. It's the John Cage. Will you look that up real quick? It's the John Cage As Slow as Possible performance. I think it's in Halberstadt. Germany.
Yeah, good luck
John
spelling
Cage As Slow as Possible. There was an American composer named John Cage. He was kind of a wackadoo guy, but he was in that 20th century school of American composers who basically were academics. Bucardi. Where is it? Is it in Halberstadt? So, okay, it was in Halberstadt. So it's the St. Bucardi Church in Halberstadt, Germany. So that's this little church building that was destroyed. And it was a ruin, like it just sat there. And so there was this American composer named John Cage where he was experimenting with what's called composer indeterminacy, which means that instead of sitting down and like purposefully saying, okay, I want this pitch to go up and I want this pitch to go down, what he did is he created like an Excel spreadsheet of pitches. And he assigned each cell a column and a row value. And he would do the I Ching system, which is where you roll die and you flip coins and you do randomizers. And so I roll the dice and I got a 6, or I got a 1 and a 5. So then I go to the first row, 5th cell, and that's my first thing that I put down in the music, and then I roll the die again. And so you keep doing that until eventually you have a piece of music.
Wow.
And he did numerous ones of these. Just basically, it's like what we do with ChatGPT.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's literally the same thing. So instead of being like, hey, compose a hymn for me, and then it just composes something, and then we can say, no, that's not good, toss it in the garbage, try again. That's basically what he was doing. So that's called composer indeterminacy. So it's randomization of composition.
Right.
And so he is very famous by doing a piece where he created his cells all of rest, values of rest, right? No music, rest. And he did his I Ching, and then he came up with a piece of music that has 3 movements, and it is basically, for the duration, it's 4 minutes and 33 seconds long, and it's called 4:33. And it's where the performer will sit down at the piano. It's composed for piano, and it's been orchestrated into many other different variations. But the performer would sit down at the piano with a stopwatch, and they would click it. And then after 59 seconds, or however long the first movement is, they would stop. And then the audience has that interim movement where they like cough and, and they get settled in. And then he closes the fall board. He or she, the performer, would close the fall board, which is the lid of the keys, and then they would click the stopwatch. And that's the second movement. Silence. Like he would tacit. He would rest. And then they would open the fall board for the third movement. And then at 4 minutes and 33 seconds, the watch is over, the watch is clicked, and the piece is completed. It's 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence.
Wow.
Isn't that odd?
Yeah.
And I thought it was, poppycock whenever I was first listening to music. But then once you get the rationalization behind it and you start asking questions of like, what is silence? And is silence, like imagine having 300 people in our worship service and we're doing the Lord's Supper and there's silence.
There's still sounds.
There's still sounds, and that's his whole point, is like, though we are resting, music does not stop. So that's the question that's asked.
That's a good way to go.
And so instead of doing, let's have a piece of music and let's have long periods of rest, let's just do an entire piece of rest.
Music, in a poetic sense, is a continuation of sounds that we hear all the time.
Yes, and I would go so much further, and I know we're out of time for this little episode, but to say the conclusion of the matter is this. There's too many things to talk about. I'm so sorry. At this St. Bucardi Church in Halberstadt, Germany, there is another piece that he composed for piano called As Slowly as Possible.
So I could play it.
You could play it. And what the performer does is it's probably 2 sheets of music, and it's just chords, right? And it's just chords. And on the piano, as you're probably aware, is that when you play a chord and you were to hold the pedal down, the damper, you hold that pedal down, the strings are struck, and then there's this natural decay of the strings until they stop vibrating.
Right.
And that takes a long time. And so what the performer will do is they'll play until the strings stop vibrating.
Really?
And then they go to the next one.
Wow.
And it's literally called As Slowly as Possible, or As Slow as Possible.
That's good. I could get on that.
So after he died, you don't like that? Well, it was done. And so after he died, there was a bunch of John Cage Society followers of his, just people who admired him. And they purchased this church building, St. Bucardi, in Halberstadt, Germany. It was a ruin. And they got money together, and they fundraised. They fixed up the church and put a roof on it. They put down gravel. And then they constructed a customized organ, a pipe organ. And it's only about as big as this table.
Oh, wow.
And I used to tune those things. So it's literally just a chest about as big as this table. And then there's air vents that are fed from these 2 very large bladders, and then there's motors running both of those. And a pipe organ can play as long as it is supplied with air.
I see.
And so you can imagine that they orchestrated as slowly as possible for the pipe organ. Okay? So follow along with me.
That's Caleb's favorite.
Follow along with me. So this John Cage Society orchestrated as slowly as possible for the pipe organ. It will play indefinitely as long as it's supplied with air. And so this piece will last. Are you looking that up? How long it'll last? So look up how long as slowly as possible will last.
Pipe organ.
In Halberstadt, Germany. And so I'll fill the time a little more. And so a chord will be playing, and it's playing now. It's playing now while you're listening to this. While everyone on this planet is alive listening to this, there is a chord playing on that pipe organ. And then it depends. Like sometimes it'll be 6 months, sometimes it'll be 6 hours, sometimes it'll be 6 weeks, where the chord will change, and they'll physically go and they have a celebration, and they'll take one of the pipes out and they'll put a new pipe in. And actually, there's like a corner up here in one of the architectural structurals where they just have thrown the pipes out of reach, and they get a ladder and they bring the pipe down. How long is it going to last?
Yes.
That's why I asked you to look it up.
Oh, 639 years.
639 years. And they have secured funding for the length of that. So the goal is for this piece as slowly as possible, as an effort to John Cage, but also to unite all of us alive today and ask the question, is it music if we all die while we're listening to it, and our children will die, and our children's children,
Wow.
and our children's 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 children will die? Like it will outlast our lifespan.
This
And
piece
so,
of music.
as a piece of music that's constantly being played, there's no way for us to hear the end of it. There was no way for my son, our children, to hear the beginning of it, because it started before they were born. And so when you start asking that question, what is music? It's unanswerable, but you can get close. And it's always a conversation to have. What is music? Because you say, is it all rest? Is it all sound? Is it a variation? And I, to close in sort of my exegesis, I apologize. What I would say is it's not about the piece of music you choose. It's not about the combination of sounds and rest. It's not about the words. What music really is, or rather to perform music together, to sing music together, specifically to worship God, it is about creating the environment with which that can be done. I'll illustrate that with a point. I don't remember the name of the violinist. I'm not really that up on the greatest violinist in the world, but it was the greatest violinist in the world. And I think he actually came to Lubbock and did a concert recently. Anyway, very famous violinist. Let's just call him Joe, and we'll name it this, and we can overdub his name. But he was playing with the New York Philharmonic in a concert, and he was conducting an experiment. And he had like his entourage following him and like YouTubing him. And he was in the New York subway, and he was practicing Shostakovich, what he was going to play that night in the subway. And people are passing by him. This is the greatest violinist in the world, the most celebrated. He's playing with all of the major symphony orchestras around the world. He has his violin case open. He's got a couple of bucks that people have thrown in. And he's sitting there practicing, and he's in the subway. That night, for illustration purposes, he gets paid $1 million to perform with the New York Philharmonic playing Shostakovich in a tuxedo. And so, is it about the music? Is it about the notes? Is it about the words? Is it about where? Or is it about creating the environment? That moment where we all sit down together and we all say, we're going to worship God. And then music can happen.
So, it give me a lot to think about there. So you need more than you need people. You need this sort of passion to come together. Music really is a heart, a rhythm, if you will, played by a bunch of people for the same reason. Well, let me just close with the famous verses we always hear when it comes to music.
Yeah.
Right, and that's in, I like the Colossians one better. Colossians 3, verse 16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and exhorting one another with all wisdom, singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, all with grace in your hearts to God. And whatever you do, in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. I guess I'm thankful we have music as a way to express what we feel, our emotions, our thankfulness to God as well. I guess we should be thankful that we all get to be a part of that.
Yeah, it's a gift, you know. And I mean, we're talking about a 45-minute me trying to express.
Well, it really makes me appreciate music more. It really does. I know this is like a normal episode, but it's really interesting.
Yeah, and there's a lot more to talk about even, and I know just sort of I hit on a couple of my, when I was teaching music appreciation, these are just some of the lessons, right, and boiled down to a couple of points. But, yeah, I really think that it's going to be really great to have our guest here at the congregation, Dane Shepard. He's going to come, and we're going to focus our attention on music and music worship because we are called to do that. We're called to talk, as you read, Colossians 3:16, is that we're supposed to encourage one another, and it says do all in your heart. And so if you're just getting together and singing the best music that sounds good, which is really easy for me to do, it's really easy for me to just focus on the rhythms and the pitches and the correct vowel, and making sure that the release is accurate and correct. It's really easy for me to do that, and I would have missed the mark if that's what I focused on in the worship. And so it's something more than just making good sound. It has to be sung from the heart, right? And so that's for next time. We can continue to flesh that idea out. But singing is good, and that I'm very thankful that God gave us music.
Yeah, no, I am too, and I'm looking forward to when we get to sing to him in heaven.
Yep,
be great. All right, I think that's a wrap. Go South.